The massive assembly hall floated in the darkness of space like a jewel. Inside, representatives from 847 different species gathered under crystal domes that stretched higher than any cathedral on Earth. Translators hummed softly as thousands of voices spoke at once. Each word converted into languages that had evolved on worlds humans had never seen. Ambassador Helena Voss sat in the human delegation section, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had been coming to these meetings for 12 years now. 12 years of polite speeches and carefully worded proposals. 12 years of being told to wait, to be patient, to understand that these things took time. Next to her sat Captain Marcus Webb, head of the human security detail. He wore his dress uniform, metals gleaming under the soft light. His hand rested near his sidearm, though weapons had never been drawn in this chamber. Not in 3,000 years of galactic peace across the vast floor. Counselor Thrain rose to speak. The Valexian was old, even by his species' standards. His scaled skin had faded to a pale green, and his eyes held the weight of centuries. He was one of the founders of this assembly, present when the first treaties were signed millennia before humans had even discovered fire. "We come now to petition 7432, Thrain announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. The human request for protected colony status. Helena's heart beat faster. 8 standard cycles. 8 years of bureaucratic delays and committee reviews. Today, they would finally vote. The voting display lit up across the chamber walls. Numbers climbed rapidly as species cast their decisions. Helena watched the count rise, 50 in favor, 100, 200, but the against column climbed. Faster, 300, 500, 700. The final tally appeared, 783 against, 64 in favor. Helena closed her eyes. She had expected this, but the rejection still cut deep. Behind her, she heard the younger diplomats shifting in their seats, angry murmurs spreading through the human section. "The petition is denied," Thrain declared. Moving to the next matter. Helena started to stand, ready to formally acknowledge the decision and request reconsideration next cycle. But then Thrain continued speaking, and everything changed. "The Council recognizes the Kryn Consortium's approved mining claim for the Tau Ceti system. Operations may begin immediately." The words hit Helena like a physical blow. She grabbed the edge of her desk to steady herself. "Point of order," she called out, her voice cutting through the chamber's ambient noise. The moderator, an insectoid creature named Administrator Kell, turned multiple eyes toward her. "The human delegation has a question." "Tau Ceti is inhabited," Helena said, fighting to keep her voice level. 40,000 human colonists have lived there for 2 generations. How can mining rights be granted to an outside party? Thrain looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "The claim was approved in closed session 6 months ago. The Kryn Consortium submitted proper documentation. The inhabitants were classified as temporary residents, not permanent settlers." "Temporary?" Helena's voice rose despite her efforts at control. "They've built cities, farms, schools. They were born there." Administrator Kell's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Ambassador Voss, this is not the proper forum for procedural complaints. The decision has been made according to established protocols. If you wish to file an appeal, the appropriate forms are available through the standard channels." "Standard channels that take 8 years to process?" Captain Webb muttered beside her. Helena looked around the chamber. Some delegates watched with mild interest. Others had already turned their attention to datapads, reviewing the next agenda item. A few seemed genuinely uncomfortable, but none spoke up. This was it, she realized. This was the moment they had prepared for, hoped to avoid, but always knew might come. She reached into her jacket and pressed a small device hidden in the lining. Across the human section, every delegate's communication unit vibrated with the same coded message. Protocol Orpheus. Helena stood slowly. Around her, all 47 human representatives rose with her. The movement was synchronized, silent, deliberate. Captain Webb and his security team formed a protective corridor down the center aisle. "Ambassador Voss?" Administrator Kell's voice held a note of confusion. The session is not concluded. Helena didn't answer. Instead, she activated her datapad and began downloading every file, every document, every piece of information her credentials allowed access to. Around her, the other diplomats did the same. Years of committee reports, voting records, closed session summaries, all flowing into human storage devices. The chamber grew quiet. Delegates from hundreds of worlds watched as the humans prepared to leave. Helena walked down the aisle, her delegation following in perfect formation. She could feel thousands of eyes on her back. At the massive doors that led out of the assembly hall, she paused and turned back. The chamber stretched before her, a monument to galactic civilization. Somewhere in her heart, she had wanted to believe in this place. Wanted to believe that reason and justice could prevail through dialogue and patience. Humanity withdraws from this assembly, she announced, her voice carrying through the perfect acoustics of the chamber. We came here seeking partnership. We were tolerated as servants. We requested protection for our people. We were given forms to fill out. We built our colonies with our own hands, raised our children on distant worlds, and you sold those worlds to the highest bidder while we sat here asking for permission to exist. She paused, meeting Counselor Thrain's ancient eyes across the vast space. When you finally understand what you've done here today, don't bother calling. We won't answer. The doors closed behind them with a deep, resonant boom that echoed through the chamber like a funeral bell. Inside, nervous laughter rippled through some sections of the assembly. Humans were barely 2 centuries into space travel. They had no significant military, no powerful alliances, no economic leverage. They were children playing at galactic politics. Administrator Kell called for order and moved on to the next agenda item. On the human flagship docked at the station's outer ring, Helena Voss entered her private quarters and locked the door. Her hands shook as she opened the safe built into the wall. Inside was a single sealed envelope delivered by courier 3 months ago with instructions not to open unless Protocol Orpheus was activated. She broke the seal and pulled out the documents inside. The cover page bore a simple title: Contingency Protocol Orpheus, Strategic Response Authorization. As she read through the pages, her expression shifted from exhaustion to grim determination. Earth had not been idle during these years of diplomatic patience. While humanity's representatives had sat in assembly chambers asking for recognition, others had been preparing for the possibility that words would not be enough. The final page contained deployment orders and access codes to military resources she had not known existed. Helena sat down at her desk and began composing messages. The first went to Earth's Strategic Command, the second to the Tau Ceti colony, the third to every human settlement scattered across the frontier. The message was simple: come home. Bring everything. Leave nothing behind. Outside her window, the assembly station glittered with lights from 1,000 docked vessels. The heart of galactic civilization, where peace had reigned for millennia, that peace had been purchased with the silence of the weak. Humanity was done being silent. 3 weeks passed since the humans walked out of the assembly. For most of the galaxy, life continued exactly as before. Trade routes operated normally. Communications flowed between worlds. The great machine of galactic civilization turned without interruption. The Kryn Consortium wasted no time. Their massive mining vessels, each the size of a small city, entered the Tau Ceti system on schedule. Trade Prince Vorak commanded the operation from his flagship, a gleaming vessel, decorated with precious metals extracted from a dozen conquered worlds. Vorak stood before the main viewing screen, watching the human colony growing larger as they approached. Domed cities dotted the surface of 3 planets. Orbital stations connected by transport tubes. Agricultural platforms floating in synchronized orbits. The humans had built well, he admitted. They would make efficient workers once properly managed. Send the evacuation notice, he ordered. 30 days to clear all settlements. His communications officer transmitted the message. Vorak expected panic, angry protests, perhaps some futile legal challenges. The Kryn had done this before on other worlds. Primitive species always reacted the same way. but the response from Tau Ceti surprised him. Within hours, the colonists began organized evacuations. Families boarded transport ships with calm efficiency. No riots, no desperate pleas. Just quiet, methodical departure. Governor Lisa Brennan coordinated the evacuation from the colony's administrative center. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many hard decisions. She had helped build this colony 20 years ago, watched children grow up under alien suns, buried friends in soil that smell. Different from Earth. All civilian transports loaded, her assistant reported. We're ready for final departure. Lisa walked through the empty corridors of the building one last time. Photos still hung on the walls, showing colony milestones. First harvest, first wedding, first child born under Tau Ceti's light. She left them all hanging. Let the Kryn see what they were taking. On the landing pad, she boarded the last transport. Before sealing the hatch, she activated the colony-wide communication system one final time. Prince Vorak, you wanted this world. I hope it's worth what comes next. The transports lifted off in perfect formation. Vorak watched them go, puzzled by the governor's words. What could a displaced colonial population possibly do? They were refugees now, powerless and homeless. What Vorak didn't notice was that every transport ship turned in the same direction, not scattering to different systems seeking shelter, but forming a convoy heading toward coordinates in deep space, where human vessels were gathering, back at the Galactic Assembly Station. Counselor Thrain sat in his private office reviewing reports. Something felt wrong. He had lived long enough to recognize patterns, and the pattern emerging disturbed him. Human trade vessels had stopped servicing 23 systems. Medical shipments from Earth's pharmaceutical laboratories had ceased. Communications relays maintained by human technicians had gone offline without explanation. Nothing dramatic or violent, just quiet withdrawals from the infrastructure of galactic civilization. THRA in accessed the Assembly's tracking database and searched for human vessels. The results made his scaled brow furrow in confusion. 3 weeks ago, the database showed 347 registered human ships. Now it showed only 41. All of them small civilian craft, over 300 ships, had simply vanished from tracking systems. He called an emergency session of the Security Council. Administrator Kell arrived first, mandibles clicking in irritation at being summoned. What is the emergency, Counselor? The humans, Thrain said simply. Where did they go? Kell accessed the same database Thrain had reviewed. Tracking error. Technical malfunction. Happens occasionally with primitive transponder systems. All at once? Every ship? Other council members arrived. Thrain presented his findings. Some dismissed his concerns. Humans were emotional creatures prone to dramatic gestures. They would calm down and return to negotiations. Others were less certain. We should locate their fleet, suggested a military advisor. Send reconnaissance vessels to their known territories? The search began but found nothing. Earth system showed only civilian traffic. Human colonies that hadn't been evacuated showed normal activity. But the military vessels, the cargo haulers, the deep space transports, all had vanished, 14,000 light-years away. Director James O'Coy walked through a facility that officially didn't exist. It orbited a dead star in an unmapped system, built slowly over 40 years by construction crews sworn to secrecy. The Assembly had dismissed humans as primitive, barely capable of basic space travel. They had never looked closely at what humanity was actually building during those years of patient diplomacy. O'Coy stopped at an observation window overlooking the main hangar. Row after row of warships stretched into the distance. Not bulky, primitive vessels, but sleek destroyers and carriers incorporating technology the Assembly assumed humans didn't possess. Status report, he said to the facility commander. All vessels operational. Crews at 95% readiness. Awaiting deployment orders. And the Ghost Fleet? Commander Torres reports her reconnaissance ships are in position. All target data has been uploaded. O'Coy nodded. He had opposed this plan when first proposed decades ago. It felt like preparing for inevitable war rather than working for peace, but the older admirals had convinced him. They remembered Earth's own bloody history, the hard lessons learned about trusting in good intentions. Hope for peace, but prepare for war. They had said, now that war seemed closer than ever, Commander Rachel Torres sat in the cockpit of her stealth ship, invisible to every scanner the assembly possessed. Her small fleet of reconnaissance vessels had spent years mapping galactic space. Every military installation, every trade route, every communications relay, the assembly had grown complacent in their peace. Their security was designed to prevent primitive species from attacking advanced worlds, not to detect advanced threats. They never imagined the primitives might catch up. Torres reviewed the data one more time. Fleet positions, supply depots, command structures. Everything humanity needed to know to fight a war they were desperately trying to avoid. "Ghost Leader, this is Ghost 7, a voice crackled over her encrypted comm. "We've detected assembly reconnaissance ships searching the outer colonies. Did they detect you?" "Negative. Stealth systems holding. But they're looking hard." Torres considered this. The assembly was starting to realize something was wrong. Good. Fear made people reconsider their actions. But too much fear might push them toward escalation. All ships maintain position. Passive sensors only. Let them search. Back at the assembly, Trade Prince Vorak began his mining operations on Tau Ceti. The first platforms descended toward the richest mineral deposits. Automated systems activated, massive drills preparing to pierce the planet's crust. Then everything stopped. Vorak stared at his control panels in disbelief. Every system showed operational status. Power levels normal. No damage, no malfunctions. But the mining platform simply would not respond to commands. Display screens across. His ship flickered and showed a simple message. "Leave. What is this?" Vorak roared. "Who's interfering with my equipment?" His technicians scrambled to regain control. They ran diagnostics, rebooted systems, tried manual overrides. Nothing worked. The platforms hung in the atmosphere. Dormant and unresponsive, on every Kryn vessel in the system, the same message appeared: "Leave." 12 hours later, the message reached the Galactic Assembly. An unidentified force had seized control of Kryn equipment without firing a shot. No ships detected. No energy weapons used. Just complete and silent control of their technology. Council. Read the report and felt a chill run through his ancient body. He accessed the assembly's encrypted channels and found a new message waiting. Sender unknown. You had 3,000 years to build a just galaxy. You built a comfortable one instead. Humanity will show you the difference. Administrator Kel called it empty threats. Prince Vorak demanded military intervention. The Assembly Council debated responses. While humanity's ghost fleet watched from the shadows, Director Okoye received confirmation that the first strike had succeeded. Not a shot fired, not a life taken, just a demonstration of capability. Phase 1 complete, he reported to the War Council. The Assembly knows we can reach them. Now they need to understand we're serious. And if they don't listen? Asked the general. Okoye looked at the deployment orders on his desk. Orders that would commit humanity to a path they could never walk back from. Then we move to Phase 2. And may history forgive us for what comes next. The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly descended into chaos. Representatives from 24 species shouted over each other while translators struggled to keep pace. Display screens showed reports flooding in from across the galaxy, mining operations paralyzed, military communications scrambled. Navigation beacons providing false coordinates. Supreme Arbiter Dren stood at the center podium, his 4 arms raised for silence. The Kaldorian was a massive creature built like a monument to military power. He had commanded the Assembly's peacekeeping forces for 2 centuries without ever facing a real threat. "Order!" his voice boomed through the chamber. "We will have order?" The room gradually quieted. Dren activated a holographic display showing the affected systems. Red markers indicated sites of interference. creating a pattern that stretched across nearly a quarter of assembly space. 23 systems compromised, Dren reported. No weapons fire detected. No ships on sensors. No casualties. But critical infrastructure has been systematically disrupted. By the humans? Administrator Kell's voice dripped with disbelief. They barely have a military. That we know of, Counselor Thrain said quietly from his seat. Dren nodded. Intelligence suggests the humans have been preparing for this scenario for decades. We assumed their technological development was limited. We were wrong. A delegate from the Nexian cluster stood. What do they want? Unclear, Dren admitted. They make no demands. They simply act. Trade Prince Vorak slammed his fist on his desk. Then we respond with force. Mobilize the fleet. Crush this rebellion before it spreads. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The assembly had maintained peace through overwhelming military presence for 3 millennia. No species had ever dared challenge that power. I concur, Dren said. I am ordering the mobilization of Battle Group Titan. 40 warships will retake Tau Ceti and establish a forward position for further operations. The vote passed overwhelmingly. Only a handful of delegates abstained. Counselor Thrain among them. Far from the assembly station, Admiral David Park watched the vote results on his command ship. The vessel hung invisible in deep space, stealth systems making it undetectable to assembly sensors. Around him, 179 other ships waited in similar silence. They took the bait, his tactical officer reported. Good, Park said. Now we see if they learn. Park was an old man by military standards, his hair completely gray, his face lined with scars from early conflicts with raiders and pirates. He had spent 50 years in Earth's Navy, first on patrol boats protecting colony ships, then commanding destroyers, and finally overseeing the secret construction of humanity's ghost fleet. He had hoped never to use these ships in anger. That hope was fading. Estimated time until their battle group arrives at Tau Ceti? 14 hours, sir. Contact Dr. Williams. Tell her to prepare her gift for our assembly friends. 14 hours later, Battle Group Titan emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Tau Ceti system. 40 warships, each carrying enough firepower to level a continent. The largest military deployment in 300 years. They found the planets deserted exactly as reported. The human colonists had evacuated completely, leaving behind only empty cities and silent infrastructure. No. Contacts on sensors, the battle group commander reported to Supreme Arbiter. Dren, beginning occupation deployment. Landing. Craft launched from the warships, carrying troops to secure the abandoned colonies. Everything proceeded according to standard protocol. The soldiers expected no resistance. Dr. Amara Williams sat in a facility deep beneath Earth's surface, her fingers flying across holographic keyboards. Around her, the best computer specialists. Humanity had ever produced monitored data streams from across the galaxy. Assembly Battle Group has committed to landing operations. One of her team reported initiate sequence, Williams ordered, on 40 assembly warships scattered across the Tau Ceti system. Buried code activated. Software that had been installed years ago by human technicians who serviced assembly vessels, maintained their computers, upgraded their systems. The assembly had trusted humans with their technology because humans seemed harmless. Eager to help, technologically inferior, every weapon system on every ship went offline simultaneously. Shields flickered and died. Engines sputtered and cut out. Life support remained functional, as did basic communications. But the warships became helpless metal boxes floating in space. On the assembly flagship, alarms screamed. The commander stared at his displays in horror as system after system reported failure. What happened? Are we under attack? No energy signatures detected, sir. No weapons fire? Systems are just failing, all of them? At the same time? The communications officer held up a hand. Sir, incoming message. Audio only. Admiral Park's voice filled the bridge, calm and professional. Assembly Battle Group Titan. This is Admiral David Park, Earth Navy. Your systems will restore in 7 hours. During that time, you are completely vulnerable. We could destroy every ship in your fleet without risk. We choose not to? This is your first and only warning. You attacked our colonies. You displaced our people. You assumed we were too weak to respond. You were mistaken. Next time you threaten human civilians, we might not show mercy. The communication ended? For 7 hours, the Assembly's most powerful battle group drifted helpless in space, while their troops remained stranded on the planets below. No further attacks came. When systems finally restored, they found their ships undamaged and their people unharmed. But the message was clear. Humanity could have killed them all. The news reached the Assembly within hours. The chamber erupted in panic. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others called for investigation into how humans had compromised their systems. A few voices suggested negotiation. Merchant Lord Tassis requested a private meeting with Counselor Thrain. The smuggler was a shrewd creature, having built his fortune by understanding things others missed. They met in a secured room, shielded from surveillance. I know how they did it, Tassis said without preamble. Explain. For 40 years, humans have serviced our ships, fixed our computers, upgraded our software. We let them because they were cheap labor and seemed trustworthy. Tassis pulled up a data file. I hired human technicians myself. Good workers. Never asked questions. Always helpful. They had access to everything, Thrain realized. Every ship. Every station. Every major installation in assembly space. Tassis looked grim. We invited them into our infrastructure and never considered they might prepare for the day we turned against them. Thrain felt the weight of his centuries pressing down. He had watched empires rise and fall. He had seen wars that consumed entire star systems. He had helped build the Assembly to prevent such conflicts, and now he saw that the Assembly itself had become the thing they swore to prevent. A power that crushed the weak beneath institutional indifference. They won't stop, Tassis continued. They can't win a direct war against us, but they don't need to. They can paralyze our infrastructure, disrupt our economy, make governance impossible. Death by 1,000 cuts, unless we negotiate. Will the others agree? Thrain looked toward the assembly chambers. Some will, but there are many who see this as an existential threat. They will push for total war. Ambassador Helena Voss received the Assembly's peace delegation in neutral space aboard a small diplomatic vessel. 3 envoys came, representing moderate factions within the Assembly. We want to end this, their leader said. Tell us your terms. Helena had prepared for this moment. Return autonomy to all displaced populations. Not just humans. Every species you've relocated for convenience or profit. Second, reform the Assembly's governing structure. Real representation, not token seats. Third, establish protected rights for developing species. No more exploitation disguised as guidance. The League envoy looked pained. These demands would require complete restructuring of galactic governance. Centuries of precedent. Precedent built on the silence of the weak, Helena replied. You had 3,000 years to create a just system. You created a comfortable one instead. Comfortable for those with power. The hardliners will never accept these terms. Then we continue. The envoys left empty-handed. Helena watched their ship depart and allowed herself a moment of doubt. Humanity was playing a dangerous game. They had technological advantages and the element of surprise. But the Assembly had numbers, resources, and battle-tested fleets. A direct war would destroy humanity. Everything depended on breaking the Assembly's will before they committed to total conflict. On Earth, Director Okoye received reports that Supreme Arbiter Dren was assembling a coalition of hardline species. They called themselves the Preservers of Order and claimed to represent the true interests of galactic civilization. They were gathering ships. A lot of ships? How many? Okoye asked his intelligence chief. Current estimates suggest 800 warships. Growing daily, their target. Unknown. but given the rhetoric from Preserver leadership. The chief paused. They're talking about making an example, showing the galaxy what happens when primitives challenge the natural order. Okoye understood. The Preservers weren't planning a limited strike or a blockade. They were planning extermination. Get me Admiral Park. When Park's face appeared on the screen, Okoye saw the same grim understanding in the Admiral's eyes. They're coming for Earth, Park said. Can we stop them? In a direct battle? No, 800 ships against our ghost fleet? We'd be slaughtered. Then what do we do? Admiral Park looked at something off-screen, then back at the camera. We change what this war is about. We make it bigger than just military force. And we do something they won't expect, which is? We prepare to lose, Park said. And make sure that when we fall, the entire galaxy watches and understands why. The evacuation sirens screamed across Mars colony, their wailing echoing through the pressurized domes that held 8 million human lives. People poured into the streets, children clutched in their parents' arms, elderly helped by neighbors. The assembly fleet would arrive in 3 hours. Governor Patricia Lang stood in the colony's command center, watching the chaos unfold on 100 monitor screens. She had been governor for 6 years, elected to manage agricultural quotas and infrastructure maintenance. Now she had to evacuate an entire world. Transports are at maximum capacity, her logistics coordinator reported. We can get maybe half the population off-world in time. Then we get half off, Patricia said. Children first. Then elderly and medical cases. Everyone else. She didn't finish the sentence. Engineer Thomas Garrett stood in his workshop, watching the evacuation on a small screen while his hands continued assembling a device he probably wouldn't live to test. He was 67 years old, had helped build half the colony's infrastructure, and had 3 grandchildren currently boarding an evacuation transport. His communication panel beeped. A message from his daughter. Dad, get to the spaceport. We saved you a seat? Thomas looked at the device on his workbench, then at the vast construction equipment visible through his workshop window. Machines designed to move mountains, to carve habitats from hostile rock, to build civilization in empty space. He typed a response. I'll catch the next one. Make sure the kids are safe. He knew there wouldn't be a next one. Across the colony, thousands of others made similar calculations. The evacuation would save some, but not all. So Mars people made a choice. Those who had families off-world began moving toward evacuation points. Those who didn't, or whose families insisted on staying together, began gathering at the colony's industrial sectors. Thomas walked out of his workshop and found a crowd already assembling. Miners, construction workers, engineers, mechanics, people who knew how to operate the massive machines that had carved Mars colony from the red planet's harsh surface. We're staying, someone said. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Then we should be ready, Thomas replied. In the cold of space beyond Mars. Admiral David Park divided his ghost fleet into 3 groups. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the ship's stealth systems making it invisible to the assembly fleet currently accelerating toward the Sol system. Enemy fleet composition? He asked. 200 warships, his tactical officer reported. Battleship-class vessels with heavy armor and main guns. Supreme Arbiter Dren's flagship is at the center of the formation. Park studied the holographic display. 200 ships against his 180, in a straight fight. The assembly's superior numbers and firepower would win. But Park had no intention of fighting fair. First Squadron, prepare for decoy run. Second Squadron, deployment of disruption field. Third Squadron, you're with me for boarding operations. His executive officer looked uncertain. Sir, boarding operations against superior numbers? We're not trying to win, Park said. We're trying to send a message. The assembly fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. Supreme Arbiter Dren stood on his flagship's bridge, all 4 arms crossed in satisfaction. Behind him, 199 warships formed a perfect battle formation. Open a channel to Mars colony, Dren ordered, when the communication line activated. Dren's voice boomed across the colony's speakers. Human settlement of Mars. You have 1 hour to surrender all military assets and submit to Assembly authority. Failure to comply will result in forced occupation. Silence answered him. They're not responding, sir, his communications officer reported. Then we proceed as planned. All ships, advance. 20 human vessels suddenly appeared on sensors, having dropped their stealth fields. They broadcast on all frequencies, drawing the Assembly fleet's attention. Dren smiled. A desperate last stand. All ships, weapons free. Destroy them. The Assembly fleet advanced, energy weapons charging. The human ships scattered, leading the Assembly vessels deeper into the Sol system. Then space erupted with chaos. 60. More human vessels appeared behind the Assembly formation. But they weren't firing weapons. Instead, they deployed thousands of small objects, proximity mines, gravitational disruptors, electromagnetic scramblers. The space between the Assembly ships became a minefield. Evasive maneuvers, Dren ordered. His ships began weaving through the obstacles. Sensors overwhelmed by false readings and jamming signals dot in the confusion. Admiral Park's 3rd Squadron made their move. Small, fast insertion craft, each carrying a team of Marines trained for zero-gravity combat. They didn't target the Assembly's weapons or engines. They went straight for the bridges. Thomas Garrett watched the battle unfold from Mars. Surface on a display jury-rigged to pick up military communications. The Assembly fleet was in disarray, but they still vastly outnumbered the human forces dot around him. Mars colonists had mounted massive mining drills on construction vehicles, turned welding torches into improvised weapons, and positioned heavy equipment to serve as barriers. If the Assembly fleet made it past Admiral Park, Mars would be ready. On Dren's flagship, the bridge crew suddenly detected boarding craft latching onto their hull. Alarms blared. Security teams to the bridge access points, Dren ordered. The airlock burst open, but not from an explosive breach. Human Marines had sliced through with precision cutting tools. They poured onto the bridge, 12 soldiers against 40 Assembly crew members, but the humans moved with terrifying efficiency. No wild firing, no shouting, just cold, professional violence honed by decades of training. Within 2 minutes, they controlled the bridge. Weapons trained on Dren and his senior staff, Admiral Park walked through the captured airlock, his sidearm holstered. He approached Dren calmly. "Supreme Arbiter," Park said. "I'm Admiral David Park. We need to talk." Dren's 4 fists clenched in rage. "You dare board my flagship? You'll be executed for this." "Probably," Park agreed. "But first, you're going to listen." Park activated a communication link. Throughout the Assembly fleet, similar boarding operations had succeeded. 15 flagships captured in synchronized strikes. The Assembly forces outnumbered the humans, but their command structure was paralyzed. "Your fleet could still win this battle," Park told Dren. "You have more ships, more firepower, but you've lost coordination. Your captains are receiving conflicting orders. Some want to continue the attack. Others want to rescue their commanders. Your formation is breaking down." "I'll see you all dead for this," Dren snarled. "Maybe, or you could order your fleet to stand down, and we all walk away from this." "You think I'll surrender to primitives?" Park shook his head. "I'm not asking you to surrender. I'm offering you a choice. Continue this attack and you'll probably take Mars eventually. You'll kill millions of civilians, and the entire galaxy will watch. Every species that ever doubted the Assembly's justice will see. You slaughter colonists whose only crime was wanting self-determination. Or," Dren demanded, "or you withdraw. No casualties, no losses. You report to the Assembly that the military operation was more complex than anticipated and requires reconsideration." Before Dren could respond, one of his subordinate commanders, an officer named Fawkes, began shouting from his station. "This is treason. I won't accept surrender to these creatures." Fawkes's hands moved across his console. Park's Marines shouted warnings, but too late. The officer had activated the flagship's self-destruct sequence. "What have you done?" Dren roared. "Saving the Assembly's honor," Fawkes replied. If we can't win, we'll take them with us. Park checked his datapad. The self-destruct will detonate in 40 seconds. The explosion will destroy 3 nearby ships and cripple the Mars orbital station, killing thousands of civilians. Dren looked at his console locked by command codes. I can't override it from here. But I can, said a voice over the communication channel. If I can reach the reactor core in time. On Mars, Thomas Garrett was already running. He had monitored the assembly ship systems remotely, watching for exactly this kind of desperate move. The reactor core was accessible through maintenance corridors. But he had seconds, his old legs protested as he sprinted through the corridors of the captured assembly vessel's sister ship docked at Mars for repairs. The layout would be identical. He knew these ships, had serviced dozens of them over the years. 20 seconds. He reached the reactor room, 15 seconds. His fingers flew across the override panel, entering codes he had memorized from years of maintenance work. 10 seconds. Access granted. 5 seconds. Emergency shutdown initiated. The countdown stopped at 2 seconds. Thomas collapsed against the wall, his heart hammering. Throughout the system, billions watched the broadcast. They had seen the assembly officer try to trigger a suicide explosion that would kill civilians. They had seen an elderly human engineer risk his life to stop it. Supreme Arbiter Dren stared at his displays in silence. The galaxy had watched. His officer's attempted massacre had been broadcast to every world with access to galactic communications. Withdraw your fleet, Park said quietly, before this gets worse. Dren gave the order. The assembly vessels began pulling back, releasing their captured commanders. Park's Marines evacuated the boardings, returning to their ships. As Park prepared to leave Dren's flagship, the Supreme Arbiter spoke. This isn't over. I know, Park replied. But now the galaxy knows what this conflict is really about. That changes everything. On Mars, Thomas Garrett was swarmed by colonists celebrating their survival. He barely heard their cheers, focused instead on a private message appearing on his communication device. It was from Counselor Thrain. Thank you for showing us who we've become. Some of us still remember what the assembly was supposed to be. We'll fight for that vision, even if it means fighting our own. But another message followed, this one from a coalition of hardline assembly members. The primitives humiliated us today. This cannot stand. We're gathering forces for a final solution to the human problem. Admiral Park received the same intelligence. The moderates in the assembly were gaining support, but the hardliners were growing more desperate and more dangerous. The next battle wouldn't be for a colony or a system. It would be for the soul of galactic civilization itself. The galaxy fractured along lines that had been forming for centuries but never acknowledged. 53 species formally declared support for humanity's call for reform. They were mostly younger civilizations, species that had joined the assembly hoping for partnership, but found only patronage. Against them stood the preservers of order, a coalition of over 400 species led by the assembly's oldest and most powerful members. They controlled the vast majority of military resources, industrial capacity, and political influence. High Overseer Merrick addressed the preservers from his command station, a massive facility that had coordinated galactic peacekeeping for a millennium. The Overseer was ancient even by galactic standards, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline structure. He had witnessed the assembly's founding and considered it his life's work. The humans must be made an example, Merrick declared, his voice resonating through the minds of assembled delegates. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. For 3,000 years, the natural order has maintained peace. The advanced guide. The primitive obey. This hierarchy exists for good reason. To abandon it is to invite chaos. Around him, delegates from powerful species nodded agreement. They had built comfortable lives within the assembly structure. The idea of genuine equality of younger species having real power threatened everything they knew. I propose a final solution, Merrick continued. We mobilize the full might of the preservers. 800 warships. We proceed to Earth and demand unconditional surrender. If they refuse, we demonstrate the cost of rebellion. The vote passed with overwhelming support. 800 vessels began gathering at designated coordinates. The largest military fleet assembled in galactic history on Earth. Director James O'Coy stood before the Planetary Council. Behind him, holographic displays showed the Preserver fleet's movements. The numbers were stark. 800 ships versus humanity's 180. We cannot win a direct engagement, O'Coy stated plainly. Even with our technological advantages, we're outnumbered 4-1. They can absorb losses we cannot. Then we surrender? A council member asked. No, we change what victory means. Admiral David Park stepped forward, activating a new display. It showed communication networks, trade routes, diplomatic channels stretching across the galaxy. We've been fighting a military campaign, Park explained. But our real weapons aren't ships or technology. Our weapons are the relationships we've built, the trust we've earned, and the truth we can reveal. Ambassador Helena Voss had spent the last weeks in constant communication with species across the galaxy. Not threatening them, not demanding support, just talking. Reminding them of shared experiences. The human doctors who treated their sick. The engineers who helped build their infrastructure. The teachers who educated their children. We have more friends than we realized, Helena reported. They may not send fleets, but they're willing to do something more important. They're willing to witness. Captain Yuki Tanaka had returned from deep space with unexpected allies. 3 independent civilizations that had refused to join the assembly centuries ago. Tired of being told how to develop, what to value, how to live. They won't fight alongside us, Tanaka explained. But they've agreed to share their stories. Why they left the assembly. What freedom cost them. What they gained? Counselor Thrain worked from within the assembly itself, a dangerous position. Many preservers considered him a traitor for supporting reform, but he still had allies, species that remembered why the assembly was founded, to protect the weak, not to rule them. He compiled evidence carefully hidden over centuries. Records of displaced populations. Species whose development was deliberately stunted to maintain dependency. Resources extracted from primitive worlds without compensation. A pattern of exploitation disguised as benevolent guidance. If we release this publicly, it will tear the assembly apart, Thrain's assistant warned. It's already tearing apart, Thrain replied. At least this way, the pieces might reform into something better. The Preserver fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system with overwhelming force. High Overseer Merrick broadcast his ultimatum across all frequencies. Humanity, you have 24 hours to surrender all military assets and submit to assembly jurisdiction. Your rebellious actions have forced this response. We take no pleasure in this, but order must be maintained. Admiral Park stood on his flagship's bridge, surrounded by his command staff. They were good people, professional soldiers who had dedicated their lives to protecting Earth and its colonies. Now he was asking them to do something that went against every military instinct. All ships, power down weapons. Disable shields. Hold position. His officers stared at him in shock. Sir, they'll destroy us, his tactical officer protested. Possibly. But if we fight, we definitely lose, and they get to claim we were the aggressors. This way, the galaxy sees who we really are. Earth's ghost fleet hung in space, completely vulnerable. Every ship broadcasting its position, weapons cold, shields down. Not surrendering, but not fighting. Simply present and defenseless. High Overseer Merrick observed this unexpected development with confusion. What are they doing? Unknown, Overseer. They're just waiting. Cowards hoping mercy will save them, one of his commanders suggested, but before Merrick could respond, transmissions began flooding the galactic communication networks. Not from human sources, but from hundreds of species across the galaxy, the testimonials came from everywhere. A young Valexian who had been treated for a rare disease by human doctors, when assembly physicians declared her case too expensive. An entire species of miners who had learned workplace safety from human engineers after the assembly ignored their casualty rates. Teachers, farmers, merchants, families who had met humans and found them to be not primitive servants, but Friends. Then came the messages from the independent civilizations. Their leaders spoke plainly about why they left the assembly: the stifling of innovation, the cultural homogenization, the constant message that they were lesser beings who needed guidance. Counselor Thrain released his evidence to every public channel simultaneously. Classified documents showing assembly policies designed to maintain dependency. Communications between high officials discussing how to keep primitive species manageable. Records of resources extracted and never compensated. The galaxy watched as 3,000 years of carefully maintained image crumbled. Ambassador Helena Voss made humanity's final transmission. She didn't speak from a warship or a government building. She stood in a small park on Earth, children playing behind her, ordinary people going about their lives. "We're not asking the galaxy to choose between us and the assembly," she said calmly. "We're asking you to choose what kind of galaxy you want. One where might makes right and the powerful dictate terms to the weak? Or one where every species, regardless of age or strength, has the right to determine their own path?" The preservers claim this is about maintaining order. But whose order? Who benefits from the current system? Who suffers? We don't claim to be perfect. Humanity has its own bloody history of oppression and injustice. We know what it looks like when the powerful rationalize their dominance. We've lived it. That's why we recognize it here. So we make this offer to the entire galaxy: let every species vote. Not their representatives, not their delegates, but the actual people. A direct referendum. Should civilizations have the right to self-determination, or should power remain centralized in the hands of the ancient and strong? We will abide by the result. If the galaxy votes for the old order, we will submit. But if they vote for change, she paused, then we'll build that new galaxy together. High Overseer Marek was furious. This is not how galactic governance works. We do not subject complex policy to popular vote. The masses lack the wisdom to make such decisions. But the transmission was already spreading. On hundreds of worlds, billions of beings were accessing the referendum. The Assembly's infrastructure, maintained by those same beings, could not prevent it. Supreme Arbiter Dren contacted Marek privately. "Overseer, we need to reconsider. If we attack now, after these revelations, we prove their point." "We prove that order matters more than sentiment," Marek snapped. "My crew is watching these transmissions. They're asking questions. If I give the order to fire on defenseless ships, I'm not certain they'll obey." Marek checked reports from across his fleet. Similar doubts spreading. Soldiers from dozens of species who had joined believing they served peace, now seeing evidence of empire. The vote took 3 days. Every hour the numbers climbed as more species participated. The Assembly's leadership watched helplessly as their carefully controlled civilization participated in something unprecedented: actual democracy. The final tally appeared: 489 species supported reform. 312 supported maintaining the current order. 46 abstained, unable to choose. High Overseer Marek stared at the results in silence. By the Assembly's own principles, the vote should not matter. But his fleet was wavering, public opinion had turned. And even he could see that enforcing order through massacre would destroy the very civilization he sought to protect. "Withdraw the fleet," he ordered finally. "This is not over, but this battle is lost." The preserver ships began jumping away from the Sol system, not defeated militarily, but unable to act without tearing the galaxy apart. Ambassador Helena Voss met with representatives from both sides in neutral space. The negotiations took months. The result was not a single unified government, but two: the Reformed Assembly and the Traditionalist Compact. The Reformed Assembly implemented the changes humanity had demanded: real representation, protected rights for developing species, autonomous development without interference. 53 species joined initially, with more following each month. The Traditionalist Compact maintained the old structure for those who preferred it. They were still powerful, still influential, but no longer the only option. 1 year after the crisis, Helena walked through the new assembly chambers. The space looked similar, but the voices were different. Delegates from younger species spoke with confidence, not deference. Debates were heated but genuine. Decisions were made through consensus, not dictation. Tau Ceti had been returned to human governance under protected status. The colonists were rebuilding, this time with treaties guaranteeing their autonomy. Admiral Park oversaw the decommissioning of half the Ghost Fleet. The ships were converted to exploration and defense vessels, but the other half remained operational, hidden again in secret facilities. "You still don't trust them," Helena observed when she visited his command station. "I trust the reformed species," Park replied. "But the traditionalists are still out there, still powerful, still convinced they're right. Peace is good. Preparation is better." Thomas Garrett received honors from both Earth and the Reformed Assembly for his actions at Mars. He attended the ceremony, accepted the medals gracefully, then returned to his workshop. There were colonies to build and infrastructure to maintain. The galaxy needed engineers more than heroes. The peace was fragile. The Traditionalist Compact controlled more military resources. Economic tensions remained. Cultural differences caused constant friction. But for the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy was genuinely discussing justice rather than simply enforcing order. A transmission arrived at Earth from one of the independent civilizations Captain Tanaka had contacted. They had been watching the reforms carefully. They were interested in joining the Reformed Assembly. Helena Voss read the message and smiled. More would come. Change was slow, frustrating, incomplete. But it was happening. She composed a response, then paused to look out at the stars visible from her office. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had not imposed their will or proven their superiority. They had simply refused to accept that might makes right. Sometimes that was revolution enough. The galaxy they inherited was old, comfortable, and unjust. The galaxy they were building was uncertain, chaotic, and full of conflict. But for the first time in millennia, it was also full of hope. And hope, Helena had learned, was worth fighting for.